All right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Jim Jansen. I'm being joined today by Allan Vyhnalek and our media specialist, Ryan Evans. We'd like to welcome you to the fourth and final Land Management Quarterly for 2023. And today's presentation will be covering a variety of topics on kind of closing out the lease and evaluating some of the different trends that we're seeing in real estate. My contact information is provided on the left hand of this slide, and we'll present this one more time towards the end of the slideshow. Allan Vyhnalek is our farm and ranch succession transition educator who's now retired. He's agreed to help us out on these webinars until we find his replacement, which we have one. And this individual is currently on maternity leave, so they will look forward to that individual introducing themselves early on in 2024 definitely by the second Land Management Quarterly, but many of Allan's presentations, webinars, things of that nature can be found at the Center for Ag Profitability website at cap.unl.edu/succession. And the information I'll be talking on today is from the Farm Real Estate website. One other thing I wanted to note, on the Center for Ag Profitability website, we have upcoming meetings and webinars. One of the webinars that we'll be presenting on, or one of the in-person meetings that we have coming up, is called Returning to the Farm. Be sure to take a special look at that on the CAP for Center for Ag Profitability website at cap.unl.edu to find some additional information on all of our upcoming meetings. The other thing I wanted to thank Sam Zock with ZAG Land. They help sponsor a portion of today's webinar, and that helps us cover some of our expenses. So we greatly appreciate outside support. And if there's anyone joining us today that'd like to sponsor a future webinar, just shoot me an email, and we'll be sure to throw your slide in twice at the beginning and at the end as well. Okay, so today's what we have planned for today, we'll be trying to get everything done in about 50 minutes, and we'll open it up for questions and discussion towards the end of our slides. And a little outline that we have here, I'll be taking basically the first 3 bullet points. The second 3 bullet points, Allan Vyhnalek will be covering, kind of the closing out the lease and that. And then we'll take a review, a look at some of the questions that were asked and submitted to us. And reminders to those joining us, if you ever have a question you'd like reviewed in these, submit them on the Land Management Quarterly website. You can actually submit the questions there, and we'll be sure to take a look at them on there. Okay, so first thing I wanted to take a look at, recently the National Agricultural Statistics Service, which stands for NASS, N-A-S-S, they recently released their county level cash rent survey findings for 2023. I know many folks are looking at cash rents for 2024. The thing to keep in mind for 2024 is sometimes we have to take a step back to know where we've been, to give us a little bit of a benchmark to know where we might be headed in 2024. Also, one other note I wanted to point out in the chat pane, Ryan Evans recently dropped in 2 comments. One, the returning to the farm is December 8th and 9th in Grand Island, and also the Land Management Quarterly webpage. So if you'd like to find either of those things, you can click on those links there and take a look at them. All right, so first thing, the USDA with their survey, it's a county-based survey that's done independent of what the University of Nebraska does. Historically, their survey is done a little bit later in the year than what the University of Nebraska does. And in recent years, it seems like they're doing it every year, just not odd numbered years. But with the survey, they happened to do it in 22. They recently did it for 2023. And the information, if you'd like to find these, the website link that we have listed on here, which these slides will be posted after today's meeting is over. The NASS website, if you actually click on this link when the slides are posted, it will take you directly towards what we have on the next series of 3 slides. The first slide we have is the dryland cash rental rates for cropland in 2023. These rates are a little bit different than what the University of Nebraska reports, and I'll review a few reasons. For one thing, the survey is a different set of individuals that are responding to the survey. Surveys occurring a little bit later in the growing season. You'll also note that there are certain counties, for example, Cherry County is in white. If the county was in white, there was not enough survey responses that they could produce a number with confidence. And obviously there's not a lot of cropland in a lot of dry land cropland in some of these major the sand hills and ranching areas of the state. So that's why we see that. And also American Hamilton County, those counties might be predominantly irrigated counties. So that's why we see some of the things that we see across the state here. And one might ask themselves, why does the USDA do a county level cash rent survey? It's just not for the short presentation here today. County level cash rents that are provided as part of this survey information are fed into what we call the Conservation Reserve Program. When there's a new call that's put out for new CRP enrollments, Conservation Reserve Program payment, or Conservation Reserve Program acres, with that, the base cash rent, now they adjust the cash rent from this to account for differences in soil type and other things, but the base cash rent that the Conservation Reserve Program works off of are some of the rates that we have listed here. I'm not suggesting they pay exactly $232. I think they pay a percent of that. And then they look at the soil index for the county, which is the best to the poorest soils in the county. Better soils tend to get a little bit more, poorer soils tend to get a little bit less. Now, on the irrigated rates, there's a few things to note on here. If you're in some of these counties, let's pick on Hamilton County, for example. If a third of the acres in Hamilton County are center pivot, or gravity irrigated versus center pivot, the average that is reported here is going to be a reflection, a weighted average reflection that accounts for some of the differences. Center pivot tends to rent anywhere $30 to $50 an acre more than what gravity or flood irrigated does. The cash rental rates that we have reported here on this slide are going to reflect those differences where they create a weighted average. So in saying, for example, and I don't know if this is true, but let's say Hamilton County, a third of the ground in that county that's irrigated is gravity irrigated, 2/3 is center pivot irrigated. The weighted average would reflect the weighting of that. These rates also assume that the landowner owns the entire irrigation system, pivot, pump, power unit. If the tenant is providing one of those things, you may see a discount in the cash rent to reflect some of those things. Sorry here. I jumped forward 2 slides instead of 1. The final thing we have here is Nebraska grazing land cash rent. So this is for the traditional 5-month summer grazing land season. And once again, you notice some of these counties which are predominantly crop counties, crop producing counties, more so than grazing land. It's one reason we don't see numbers listed in here for grazing land in Platte and Colfax, which may be predominantly crop production instead of grazing land. And what influences cash rents? We've mentioned these in prior webinars or recordings. Quality of the land, and this is just not for grazing land, but quality of the land, configuration of the parcel of ground. So do you have a parcel of ground that is a nice square piece? Is it cut up by a ditch or trees or waterways or something of that nature? Especially in cropland, with the larger equipment we have, we tend to want to see ground that has fairly uniform properties across it. It's not to say the ground is farmable, it isn't desirable to have, but it might be a little bit more competitive to have a nice square quarter versus a parcel of ground. Maybe it's irrigated, but you can only run the pivot around part of it because the other part's too steep, or it has a ditch, or some obstruction that limits some of the things that you might be able to do out there. Same thing with grazing land. Is it a nice parcel to graze? Maybe it's too wet to farm, but it makes exceptional grazing land, or vice versa. All these different things influence the cash rental rates that we see reported by the USDA. I wanted to feature one other thing here before we have Allan get started. There's been a lot of interest. We just wrapped up our current farm bill here at the end of September, if I'm not mistaken. And we just recently, if you've been watching the news, there's been a farm bill extension, and we're starting to digest some of the information in that. My understanding, it appears that the ARC and PLC programs will be extended out an additional year through the end of September of 2024. Maybe we'll have another extension. Maybe we'll have a new farm bill passed by then. here regardless, it's good to take a step back and I'll look into a little bit of these intricacies of these different things. The slides here are put together by Dr. Brad Libin with the Department of Agricultural Economics here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And I want to take a look at a little bit on the farm income side, but especially this ARC and PLC, which are the kind of the mainstays of the FSA crop risk management programs that we see right now, or disaster programs. So first thing, be aware that CAP does a webinar that's done independent of what we're doing today. It's done each Thursday, our Thursday webinar that was done back on October 12th, 2023. And this was jointly hosted by the University of Missouri along with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And with this webinar was kind of a farm income outlook in addition to farm policy or farm program outlook. So I took some of the slides from that I wanted to highlight some of the different things for us to be thinking about as we're closing out the 2023 calendar year and going into 2024. First thing, when it comes to Nebraska farm income, we have a slide here that goes back to the early 1970s, and then it's forecasted through 2030, end of this decade. You'll see two different things. The blue is the Nebraska farm income, not accounting for any disaster payments. And then the green is government payments, and that would include disaster payments of various kinds. What do we see? Well, some of these years when COVID occurred, obviously, disaster aid that was paid out made a significant difference in our income, and there's still been some disaster aid paid out even with the higher incomes that we're seeing right now. But it appears for the upcoming decade, based on some of these forecasts, that net farm income will be a little bit higher than what we've seen over the prior 2010 to 2020 or so. It's anyone's guess what's going to happen, but I will say it's almost eerie compared to what happened in 2020 to 2020, 21, 22, 23, when income spiked. We had extensive drought in certain years across Nebraska, parts of the United States. Some eerie similarities between what we're seeing then versus what we're seeing right now, what we've seen a decade ago versus what we're seeing right now. So hopefully we don't end up back down here, but it looks like income is gradually going to step down a little bit over time, maybe reflecting slightly lower prices, for example. People are always talking about the income produced. Well, our two biggest sectors here on the agricultural side, we're either talking on the crops, which are in green, and then the livestock receipts, which are in blue. And think about the last time we had a major drought. With that, we've seen some of our livestock inventories decline. With that, we led to higher cattle prices, and there's that cyclical nature, especially on the livestock side, to prices that we see. And the similar thing that we had with the extensive drought that we had, and with that, some of the prices rebounded to reflect the changes in the dynamics of supply and demand. And it appears that our livestock sector is going to still have some fairly robust receipts from that. Crop prices, and they might be backing off a little bit, but still they're higher than what we were under the prior time we kind of bottomed out, or were lower than what our prior high had been. So that's kind of an outlook, and this is just overall for the state of Nebraska. And the big question people always talk about when cash rents roll around, we have to negotiate cash rents and the considerations with that. How do we look at some of our bigger expenses? And if you're a landlord joining us or a tenant joining us today, you're going to take note. I always say the big three on crop production is seed, fertilizer, and chemicals. Now, we don't exactly have that up here right now, but fertilizers and green. And obviously that peaked, and a little bit of a cyclical nature with that whenever anytime we see higher commodity prices. But hopefully we're coming off that peak here for 2022, 2023, and we're kind of trending down. Still, things are a little bit higher than they've been. Fuel and oil, so they were talking about mainly diesel for on the ag side. Things clearly have spiked. They maybe have subsided a little bit. Electricity, Nebraska, the one good thing that we have about our inputs, we're always a state that has had fairly competitively priced electricity across the state. Yes, there's been years where it's slightly increased or decreased, but generally speaking, we've had fairly affordable electricity over time in our state. And the final thing before we go more to the farm level things to be thinking about with these ARC and PLC decisions related to the different types of government disaster assistance payments that are made. What have they been? Well, this is a little bit of a historical look since the 1990s. You know, the dark blue here, for example, that was a program called direct payments. We don't have those anymore. The yellow is the crop programs. The pink is supplemental disaster assistance, which during COVID, you might have been looking at the Paycheck Protection Program, for example. That would have been maybe one of those things. And some of the disaster assistance that was paid out to help even out the effects of COVID are seen on this slide. And it appears that government safety net payments are probably going to be declining a little bit, assuming we keep getting adequate rain and commodity prices don't fall off too much. And the green in here is actually the conservation, if I'm not mistaken. This would be like the CRP program, maybe equip payments, if you're familiar with that program. Those are some of those different things. We've always had a pool of money helping support the conservation reserve program across our state. Now, switching the page here a little bit, we step back from, first we were at the county level in Nebraska looking at cash rents. Then we stepped back and looked at the state. Well, now we're going to step down and be thinking about what are we facing at the farm level again. Well, some of the things that we're facing at the farm level right now, one of those big things is what in the heck is going to happen to the prices on different things. And well, that's a good projection to be looking at. And one of those things to be thinking about is keeping in mind there's always different projections. Projections are rarely right 100% of the time. On this slide that Brad Lewin put together, we're looking at some of the different price projections that the USDA has done. We have them in different colors here. And, you know, obviously some of these, the market price is in black, what actually happened to the market in your average price of corn. And then you have what the projections are. Well, even if the projection's right for maybe a year or two, it tends to get off quite a bit. It appears based on some of the more recent projections, whether from the USDA or the Chicago Board of Trade Outlook or the Food Agricultural Policy Research Institute at Surrey Outlook, seems like things are going to be backing down a little bit more, getting more in line with that kind of that $4, $4.50, $5. It's not to say we can't make money at these levels. I don't foresee necessarily going back to $3.50 corn, but we may have to be looking at a little bit tighter margins on some of our operations. And with these prices, why are the prices so important? Well, the prices are so important is because they trigger different things. Remember, the ARC and PLC program for the 2023 production year are actually going to be paid in late September, early October of 2024. So we have our different price guarantees. We have a price guarantee with what we call the price loss coverage program. The classic number is $3.70 for corn and $8.40 for beans is always a big interesting one for many people. The ARC program is based off of marketing your average price, where you're looking at the last 5 years of prices, drop the high, drop the low, and average the last 3 years that are left. And based on this, the projected PLC payment rate is 0 right now because our marketing your average price is far above that. And also our marketing your average price, if you just held the yield component of the ARC guarantee constant, you produced exactly what the guarantee was. And it doesn't look like there's a lot of great, quote unquote, not really in the money for that, for the major commodities that are closest one would probably be sorghum in Nebraska when it came to the ARC program, but we're trending usually about $1, at least $1, if not several dollars, $2, $3, $4 or whatever above that. And the thing I wanted to highlight is projections for payments don't appear to be there for the PLC program for 2023, paid in 2024. And it would take fairly substantial declines to see any potential payments under these programs. So that's why, let's review briefly what we covered. We talked about the county level cash rents. Where do they come from? What do they mean to us as a state in terms of the Conservation Reserve Program, for example? Kind of benchmark where we've been to know where we're headed. If you want more or you want to pay less, what you're paying, how does that stack up? Are you way above the average, way below it, whatever? Look at a brief outlook, appeal on farm income and things of that nature. Some of the inputs are starting to gradually decline, but they're still a little bit higher than what they've been in recent history. And you got to be making prudent financial decisions as currently disaster payments don't appear to be quote unquote in the money for Arc PLC, or if they would be, I have to see a pretty good drop in some of these different things. So with that, as we're going along, if you have a question, either type it into the chat or Q&A pane. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and turn my camera off, and Allan Vyhnalek will be joining us to present here for about the next 15 to 20 minutes or so on things that we need to be thinking about. So Allan.
I'm here. Good afternoon now, and thanks for having me. I appreciate being on one more time, I think. Let's see here. You guys can hear me and see me, is that correct, Jim?
Yes, you're just fine now.
Okay, thank you. All right. So appreciate being asked to help out one more time. Hopefully this is the last one. I mean, not that I don't mind. I'm fine with doing it, but I hope very much that the new person comes on. But this has been a passion of mine. I've worked on this for 15 or 20 years now already, and I'm very pleased to be able to keep sharing this information with folks. I would go on to the next slide, Jim. Okay. So as we work on what we're doing, we've got to have good communication for leases. I think that we have to visit with people more than just when the leases need renegotiate for the new year. It has to happen more often than that. And now in the fall, especially now if we're pretty much done after harvest, it's a good time to go out there and get on that farm and take a look at what we got going on for ditches or erosion issues. Now in some parts of the state it didn't rain, but in some parts of the state it did. So how's that being controlled? And I drove through an area of northeast Nebraska a couple of days ago, and people had been out there doing some fall tillage, and they basically just either dissed in or tilled the ditches in instead of really fixing them. And that bothers me. I think that now's a good time to think about putting in things like erosion control, terraces, and different things to make sure that we do a good job of handling the water, so it not just keep eroding in the same ditch all the time. You could diss that in until the cows come home, and it's going to still come up with the same ditch. And so what I suggest in this picture is, if you look here on the right side, I have a tile drain. So you put some kind of a terrace in or a dirt berm in, and you put a tile drain in so that water has to stop and it'd be released slowly through a tile. I think that's a better way of handling that. And in some cases, well, it's getting to be too late in the fall now, but there's, like henbit here in southeast Nebraska and all of eastern Nebraska for that matter, is starting to emerge. It's a winter annual, and henbit was on some of the farms that I was on this fall. And in the fall is a great time to get that sprayed or lightly tilled so you don't have to deal with that. And so did you do that, or is your tenant doing a good job with that? Just something else to consider. Okay, go ahead. All right. Now, another issue that comes up is on cash leases, do we have to share the yield information? Should the tenant share the yield information? And I'll have tenants over the years tell me, no, I'm not going to tell my landlord yield information. That's my information. I'm paying a cash rent. I'm paying a good cash rent. Why would I have to share that information? Because if I share the information, it'll just be used against me to find a new tenant. And that to me is sad. To me, I think that it's appropriate to share the information. I think it's okay to for the tenant to give the landowner the actual yield data from the monitor if they can understand what they're looking at, they understand what that map means. But here's the caveat. I think that the other thing we have to do is we have to tell the landlord that we're going to share this information with you, and we don't have to, but we're going to, because we want you to have all the information we have. Sorry, I'm fighting a cold. That the main thing here is to understand that you need to treat it like the HIPAA laws in medical, the client-patient relationship in medical. In other words, you don't go sharing this information with other people. That's between you and a tenant landlord. That's it. You don't share it with other people. So please be sure that if you get this information as a landlord, the tenant provides you that information. That should be yours. It's proprietary, and you don't share it with others, and you don't talk about it. That's something you guys have to deal with. Can ask, landowner ask for this? Yes. And can the landowner put it in the lease that he gets this information? Yes, but he also should put in the lease that he's not going to share it with others. Okay, go ahead. Okay. Some other things that come up in the fall is the whole issue of corn stalks. Who gets to use the corn stalks? So if it's a crop, if it's a cash lease, the corn stalks belong to the tenant unless they're held out by the landlord. Unless the landlord specifically says you don't get to use the corn stalks, they belong to the tenant. They can either graze them or they can put them up as corn stalk bales. Either way is fine. The big thing I run into is that landlords will think that they should have gotten a part of the income from the corn stalk bales if they sell them, or if the tenant, for instance, doesn't have cattle and they have their neighbor come and graze stalks, and the neighbor pays them to graze the stalks. That still belongs to the tenant, so the landlord can't ask for that unless they make arrangements ahead of time before it all happens. The thing I would caution is on the baling, just make sure you don't bale the same acres off the same field every year, and do that every third or fourth time you have corn on that field, not every time you have corn on that field. It takes, quite honestly, the baled product, the baled stalks, leaves, husks, all that sort of thing, it's a great product for bedding and or grinding up for feed as a filler in cattle rations. It's awesome. But if you take it from the same field all the time, every time there's corn out of there, you're taking off too much phosphorus and taking off too much organic matter off that field. You have to space that out a little bit to make sure you do that properly. And if you got questions about any of this stuff, we'll just put it in the chat and go from there. And Jim, if you have anything to add, you can jump in anytime. Go on to the next slide. Another thing that comes up in the fall is do we allow the tenant to put manure on our ground? And how much and how does that work and all that stuff? Well, manure overall is an outstanding product. It adds lots of phosphorus, it adds organic matter. Overall, it's very good for our soils. It just really is. The main thing I'd recommend is on manure and manure application is it's done based on phosphorus requirements. All CAFOs, which are confinement animal feeding operations, have to follow recommended manure application based on phosphorus recommendation for the soil. So make sure that whoever's applying manure on your farm is following those recommendations and doesn't put on manure too often or at too heavy of a level. We have to remember that we want to apply manure based on the phosphorus needs. And so that saves us quite a bit of money because I don't have to put phosphorus fertilizer out there, and phosphorus fertilizer is expensive, so that's good. But do it based on phosphorus needs. Don't worry about nitrogen. Do it based on phosphorus needs. And just don't allow too much phosphorus to get out there. Because if you put manure out there twice a year or once a year, and it's once in the spring, once in the fall, and you do it every year like that, phosphorus is going to go through the roof. And my concern there is just simply this. If we have too much nitrogen in the soil, go back to nitrogen for a second, that if it rains a lot, that nitrogen gets leached down into the groundwater. We talk about that all the time. If we have too much phosphorus in the soil, we have to remember that phosphorus does not leach. Phosphorus sits on top of the soil. So if we have one of these catastrophic or big rains, where's the phosphorus end up? Phosphorus ends up down the rivers, down the streams, down the rivers, and ends up in the Mississippi Delta. So, and agriculture is getting a black eye on that too. So let's make sure that we're applying phosphorus, we're doing it at the right levels, and that's why, because we don't want too much phosphorus to end up in our water system. Okay, next slide. Okay, we just finished deer hunting, so this is almost like a week too late to talk about this, but we finished deer hunting like yesterday, so last night. So, but there's still some bow hunting. That's what this guy's doing in his stand, and then there's still some other things going on that way. Shotgun season for pheasants is still going on, but anyway, so hunting season's here. Who has the hunting lease? The hunting lease is usually held by the landlord for crop ground. For crop ground on cash rent, the hunting belongs to the tenant unless the landlord holds it back. For crop share, if you're sharecropping, then the hunting lease belongs really to the landlord unless they make some arrangements to split it. And if you have pasture, the hunting rights typically stay with the landlord because usually a pasture lease is a 5-month lease. So the pasture lease ends before hunting season starts. So you just, the hunting reverts back to the landowner. So good communication is needed here. Just understand that it gets messy if you charge for hunting, and for any case, you let somebody go hunt on your ground, or somebody gets on your ground to go hunting there, whether you give them permission or not. Make sure you have some liability insurance to cover you in case they fall into a hole, break an ankle, and say that you're liable for a nuisance out there that shouldn't have been. So good insurance is needed to cover yourself as a landowner or as a tenant in the case of hunting. Okay, go ahead. Okay, what should happen for cash leases in 2024? Given the slides we just looked at from Jim, input costs are not way up for producers. That's probably a comment that should have been made last year and was made last year, and I didn't adjust that properly. Input costs are up. They're not declining a lot. They're pretty steady and even higher. The input costs that are getting crazy right now is the whole machinery repair business. And the cost of tires and the cost of repairs. What used to be a $30 belt when I was a kid for a combine, for instance, a $30 to $50 belt when I was a kid for a combine is now worth $300 or $400. I mean, it's insane how much parts cost. So, and the other thing I would say is what other considerations you have to think about is what happened this year. I mean, there's parts of Southeast Nebraska where we had excellent crops, and there's parts of Southeast Nebraska, especially where my farm's at, where we had terrible crops. And so you have to consider that, what happened last year, and kind of to think about that as you go forward a little bit. Crop prices are decent, and you have to. My caveat on this is I wrote this slide about 3 weeks ago. Prices were better then than they are now 3 weeks later, and so crop prices are okay. But what about expenses? And so I really encourage people to push a sharp pencil and do an equitable split of the income, or you have to consider this for crop share or flex leases or anything like that. Do an equitable split so that both parties are treated fairly. Okay, go ahead to the next slide. The main message, of course, with all this is please have a written lease. Written leases carry a higher value over a verbal lease. Verbal leases are really a tough go because when we consider both parties under a lease, we have to understand well, let me explain it this way. In my generation and my parents' generation, a verbal lease was the way we did things because we said our handshake was worth something, our word was our bond. And now with newer generations, we have to understand that and that's still valid for our generation, but when we have unforeseen passing of older landlords or older tenants, then the next generation has to come in and manage this lease, and they don't have anything written down. They have nothing to go by. So that's where it gets to be a bit of a sticky wicket. We're not doing a written lease for us. We're doing a written lease in case we're not here. So please have one. Please have one done for your farm, and we cover the timing of getting a written lease terminated later in the deal. Jim, did you have something to throw in there? No. Okay. So let's see, what else do I need to throw in right here? I think we're in pretty good shape there. Just make sure you have a written lease. Go on to the next slide. If you need to start a written lease, get it from AgLease. Get a fill-in-the-blank copy from aglease101.org. It's a free PDF lease that you can actually, if your computer can actually fill out a PDF. The leases are found in that document library link that's in the upper right-hand corner of that webpage. Go ahead. Oh yeah, and then this is the next. If you click on that document link or that document library, then this is the page that'll come up, and you click on information about lease publications, which is on the left side of the screen, or if you go to the right side of the screen, that's the actual leases that you can do fill in the blank with the PDF. They're very complete, so you don't necessarily have to have all the blanks filled out, or you won't use all the sections, but you use all the sections of it applicable to you. And I've had several people over the years say, hey, that really gave me a great place to start, and we highly recommend it. Okay, go ahead. Okay.
Sorry, my pointer keeps. All right, so what we'll do on these questions here, I think I'll take the lead on the first one or two, and then we'll have Allan. I'm sure there's a couple questions you can throw in. Question we had asked a while back was, what are the majority of farmers choosing when it comes to a crop insurance policy? Well, an interesting article the USDA, the Economic Research Service, put together, and the majority are focusing primarily on the row crops, and when it comes to the row crops, the revenue protection insurance is the most popular option that people are taking. Usually around that 70-75%, give or take a little bit, depending on what area of the state you're in. But the insurance that's being used is mainly on row crop operations and also small grains. And with that being said, that's kind of the main thing. And another question that was asked to me, so let me jump ahead here. All right, well, I'll answer the next two questions, Al, then you take the next one. What's going to be happening? And I had this question typed in on the Q&A. We'll go ahead and answer this as this slide is being reviewed here. Where are land prices and cash rents headed for 2024, the future? And the two things we always talk about in our in-person workshops when we focus a little bit more on this is, one, where are future, the prices, the value of what we're doing, where's that headed? So talk about revenue and expenses, but where's the prices of corn, soybeans, cattle, things of that nature, where are they headed? You'll see on this slide here for 2023 entering 2024, land values clearly have peaked. If they haven't peaked, they're pretty darn close to it. And, we're gradually seeing things back off a little bit, kind of review the past. We're following something pretty similar here. So maybe we'll see somewhat steady, I'll call the land market maybe steady in the future. And the other big thing is cost of borrowing. And we just happen to have the 10-year treasury yield rate. I'm not suggesting you can go out and buy a farm at 5%. I'm sure there'd be a lot of people wish you could. But the interest rates are fairly, I want to say a 30-year note right now is probably closer to 7.5% to 8%. So that's kind of the outlook on where land prices are going. Cash rents, I always tell people, talk about profitability. Allan mentioned several times about input expenses. What are the expectations for yields? I know certain areas of the state have gotten rain. Other areas are still quite dry. It just depends where you're at. But talk about the productivity of what you got and what does profitability look like. The operator doesn't have to get out their checkbook, but on a basic level, just negotiate 1 acre at a time. And what I mean by that is, what's the profitability look like for an acre of corn or soybeans or wheat or whatever you have, or for your cow-calf operation, what's profitability look like this year or last year compared to the last several years? So those are some of the things to take a look at. Al, I think the next slide right here, do you want to take this question or you want me to take it?
I can do it. What provisions need to be in a verbal lease termination letter? So if you have a verbal lease or handshake agreement, you need to terminate that. And so to do that, here's some things to consider to put in that lease letter. Jim and I have also been asked over the years, several times a year, would you provide me a sample termination lease letter? No, we're not going to do that because the university doesn't want to have that legal liability of providing something that may not be actually accurate. But here's some things to consider. You want it dated. You want its name and address of both the landlord and the tenant. You want some kind of legal description of the property. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's got to be pretty good, so there's no ambiguity about where it's at. You want you would have to say that you're terminating the lease as of whatever date that is, and then you would also I think it's also appropriate to say something like, we are interested in talking to you about going to a written lease if that's what you want to have happen. If you're not wanting to lease that person anymore, you should also talk about that we're concluding this lease. We're going to go a different direction. The thing that's not on this list is that I think that you have to also put in your letter that if that tenant has personal property on the ground on the farm, that personal property needs to be removed by the date, whatever date that is, March 1st, February 28th, whatever date you have on there. And make sure that they understand, and personal property may be things like hay bales or pieces of equipment or a gate or for some fencing or whatever. Just make sure that's clear. And then so that doesn't stay on there, so you have a clear, free, empty farm to get farmed by the new tenant. And then attorney can send this for you at a nominal fee, and I would even consider working with that attorney and have him get that letter put together for you. It's just not going to be that expensive. It's well worth having somebody fight you on it. And then be sure to send certified letter with a return receipt, so you have a receipt the other party received it. So in case there's any ambiguity or it goes to court, he can say that the other party goes, no, we didn't get a letter. Well, you can show them the written thing that says, yeah, you did. You signed for it. So make sure you have that too. But get these termination letters in usually by September 1st. And then, so leases in effect right now, if you didn't terminate them by August 31st of 23, now they're in effect from March 1st, 24 to February 28th of 25. And so you have to terminate by next August, by the end of next August, so that you have that terminated. You can start with a written lease after that.
All right, very good. I think the next one, Al, you can take this as well.
Okay, let's see it. Ground is sold, current lease ends. Does notification need to be given to the tenant on lease termination? Well, yes, you should tell them what's going on so they have a chance. If they want to buy the ground, you let them have a chance to buy it, they could buy it. But more importantly, understand that if you didn't terminate a lease, okay, and a current lease is in effect, that tenant has the right to farm that ground in 24 because you didn't give termination notice by September 1st, 23. So make sure, but if the ground is sold all the time with the idea that the current tenant gets to farm that ground for one more year, and that happens. That's not unusual. The thing I would recommend, I mean, and so a question just came into me last week. I shoved it off, got it to Dave Aiken, our attorney, to handle it. But in this case, a tenant had already done some fertilization for 24 crop. And then part of their family had passed away, and they want to know if they had the lease for 24. Well, that's a whole can of worms I don't want to talk about right now. But if the landowners didn't want that person to continue with the lease, they would have to reimburse them for the cost of the inputs that they put out there already for 24. That would only be the right thing to do, and a court of law would uphold that. I hope that I did that, Jim. If you want to fix it, you can fix it.
No, the big thing is anytime you have a land transaction occurring, just make sure each and every party understands what's occurring out there. It's not hush hush, and if a tenant sees that there's a sale bailout on the property that they're supposed to be farming in this verbal lease, of course they're going to be upset over that. So if you're going to sell the ground, just be forthcoming and let the other person know so they can plan accordingly. If they want to buy the ground, great. If they aren't going to buy the ground, well, then they can use that money for inputs on their other properties or find something else to rent, whatever. I mean, there's always other options that are out there. Just maintaining good communication is very important. Had another question come in here that I was reviewing while you were going over. One question that came in, we have somebody that asked a question that is there anything else besides these Zoom webinars that Allan and I have done for absentee or knew someone that recently inherited land? And I'm going to jump ahead here. We have upcoming meetings. Our fall winter meeting series for 23 to 24 is called So You've Inherited a Farm, So Now What? With this meeting series, it's geared to anyone and everyone. Landlords, tenants, people that are recently going to be inheriting land, people that are now having to think about land succession transition, regardless of your age of life. We have a series of dates scattered across the entire state where we have some decent host sites. I'll just briefly kind of go through these as I'm talking about. We're going to first start roughly here in the eastern part of the state. And then that early part in December, we're going to be working out into western Nebraska. We had Alliance on that, or excuse me, we have O'Neill and Lexington on the 4th, O'Neill. Then we'll be switching over to Ord. We also have some sites out in Sidney and Alliance out in the Panhandle, Beatrice, Dakota City. I believe Dakota City will be the last location for 2023, and then we'll get started again in January and February. The thing to note, all these locations, you just call the local county extension office, you ask to get registered, and we just need to have a head count a day or two depending on the site if we're having lunch. If it's starting at 10:30, we're having lunch. If it's starting at 9 or 1, we'll just have some refreshments present at the meeting, but not having lunch as part of it. And then here in 2024, early on, we'll also be in central and northeast Nebraska. We'll be jumping around here a little bit. But as always, just give the local host meeting a call. And that's a great place if you have recently inherited some ground. Try to attend one of these webinars, or if you're having to eventually give something to someone, come and we're not going to tell you how to put together a complete estate plan. We'll give you the motivation on the things, especially with Allan's section, the things that we need to be thinking about. I'm going to go back a few slides here. All right. I'll answer this question here too. Will the increase in land values continue, and what causes it to rise? Well, the two underlying supporting things that have influenced the land values in the last year, last 3, 5 years, whatever it's at, wherever you're at, profitability. So, okay, if people are making money, they're probably going to capitalize it. They're going to spend it on trying to buy things, machinery, land in certain cases. And the cost of borrowing during COVID, interest rates, if they're not half of what they were right now, if you take, I think I've seen some 20 or 30-year land loan interest rates that were getting advertised at get out all the way down to like 3.5% or something, or 3.25%. It got an effective 3.5 or 3.25%. You start playing around with the numbers on the cost of borrowing. As interest rates go up, you tend to see land values at most at least stabilize and sometimes head down. There's an inverse relationship because there's only so much money to go around. And unless you're paying 100% cash for the purchase, the higher the interest rates tend to lead to a factor or force that influences and weighs down on land. So my crystal ball for 20. And secondly, what are interest rates going to be? I think we might see markets maybe being a little bit more steady. And finally, I think Zeg Land with Sam Zock. His phone number and email address are on here, so please reach out to him if you have any questions or need anything. He's based out of Humphrey, Nebraska, but he works across the state, kind of the eastern part of the state. Okay.
Well, Jim, I want to throw a couple comments in. One is, I understand that in certain neighborhoods of Nebraska, that the land rental rates, cash rental rates are extremely high. And landlords automatically get excited that they should have towards the top of that rental rate. And I would suggest that maybe you consider, if I'm happy with my tenant, if they're doing a great job for me, if they're taking care of my ground, maybe that's the more important factor than what I get for my rental rate. To me, the big objective here is to, when we get done with this ground in 20, 30, 40 years, however long we own it, because we'd only own it for our lifetime, that's it. Have I made that piece of ground a better piece of ground for the future? And we do that with good animal science, good agronomy practices. We do that with good fertilization practices. We do that. And so if somebody's doing that for you, and the ground is being made better for the future, that to me is more as important than the biggest rental rate in the county. So please consider that, and especially if you're happy with your tenant, especially if it's a younger person, it's just trying to get started. Make those considerations as you work on this. If you got questions, get a hold of Jim. I'm retired. Get a hold of Jim.
All right. Well, before we wrap up here, Al, I had another question comes in, and it relates to what you talked on. I'll read it out for everyone and also for you to review. For cash rent, should the landlord ask or know the APH of the farm? I know you talked about this, but would you like to review that one more time?
Yeah, I actually, what I talked about was actually knowing the actual yield, but I think it's appropriate. I think it could put in a lease too, if the landlord wants to do it, to ask the tenant every year to provide that APH, meaning they get out that insurance piece of paper. Usually all tenants have insurance, and your farm has a farm number on it and on that insurance paper. And they need to provide you or show that to you, or let you have a copy of that APH for that farm. It's actual production history or an average of about the last 10 years of yield. If you want to fine tune that, knowing how crop, how do I want to say this, how crop varieties or crop hybrids have increased in yields, especially on the corn side, you could just do some kind of an APH or average of the last 5, might be more appropriate. But yes, it's very, very good to have that APH history, because that APH then tells us how we should consider if we have an above average farm or a below average farm for the county. If we're looking for the top rent, or if we're looking for average rent, or we're looking for below average rent. I know that for Saline County, my farm produces very poorly because of the rainfall, not because of anything the tenant does that's wrong. It's the rainfall pattern. And so could I ask for top cash rent for that county, for that farm? I don't think so. I think it's a bad idea, because I'm not helping that tenant continue their operation by putting them in a position to lose money. So that's my thoughts on that, Jim. If you got something else, go ahead.
No, I think that's a good topic the way you covered it. All right, my slide advancer, I need to get a new one before I do this again. Final comment as we wrap up here. We're going to be conducting the farm real estate survey again. As part of the farm real estate survey, we're sending out the number of surveys we do. It costs a lot with the printing and that. If anyone joining us today would like to make a small donation to the University of Nebraska, the Nebraska Ag Land Studies Fund, the University of Nebraska Foundation has a small account set up that all it goes directly towards is the printing and mailing costs associated with the survey. So if you'd be interested in that, please consider that. We take any donation of any size. So had several people that maybe send in 10 or 20 bucks a person. Anything helps to go in towards covering the cost of that. And we've mentioned our meetings once again. Just call the local extension office and get registered if you'd like to attend. And I'm gonna flip here. Our webinar, if I'm not mistaken on the date, I believe it should be February 19th. And we'll be taking a look at some of the trends in cash rents, try to narrow down that a little bit more on how, where do we think cash rents are going to be headed, good practices for 2024, and review any questions. So if you got more questions as they're coming in, please be sure to take a look at them. So with that, Allan, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'd like to just remind people that if you're a farmer and you have the next generation coming back to the farm, please consider that returning to the farm workshop that Ryan posted in the chat or the Q&A. I forget where he put it at the beginning of the webinar. Go back and look at that. It's a very good workshop. I'm not helping this year, but I have helped in the past, and it's well worth your time and money to do that. Oh, there, Ryan put it back up in the comments. Thank you, Ryan. And it starts at middle afternoon, early afternoon on Friday, and ends by the middle afternoon on Saturday. So it's in Grand Island. It'll be December 8th and 9th, and I highly recommend that for anyone that has that next generation coming back, and to go to the workshop. We want both generations to show up, so they all come. Both generations come, or 3 generations come, and you start working on your plans to transition that operation to the next generation. And so the next generation knows, hey, I may not get it right away, but I should be able to get it someday. Those are kind of important conversations to have. So I highly recommend it.
Okay. Well, with that, we thank Allan for helping us in retirement once again. It's hard to believe what you've been retired 6 months now, Al? 7?
I don't know. April 4 to 11 is actually 7. So yeah, 7 months.
Yeah, doesn't seem like you've been retired that long. But anyways, he is helping this winter with our. So you've inherited a farm. So now what meeting series? Given that our other colleagues on maternity leave right now. So I look forward to making one more. So if you want to see Al talk in person, he's still going to be helping us out one more time. But with that, I think we're right at time. We're pretty close to it. And I think we had another good session here. As always, if you have questions, please send me an email. Allan is retired. If you send him one, he'll probably just forward it to me. So being a retiree, he can enjoy that luxury. So I'm more than happy, and if I can't answer it, I will find someone that can. So with that, please join us on February 19th, and thank you for today's sponsor, and please consider the Nebraska Ag Land Studies Fund if you'd like to make a donation there. So appreciate your time. Thank you.